So a AAA server we're going to work with is most often a radius server. That stands for Remote Authentication Dial-In User Service server. So that allows us to authenticate ourselves. Now AAA itself stands for Authentication Authorization and Accounting. Okay, that's what we want from a AAA server. And obviously a radius server is most often what we see. Some good examples of radius servers in the real world is ICE. We see that a lot, and then that is usually connected up to our Active Directory. That's where we get our user accounts and passwords. We usually have a wireless LAN controller that can act as a local AAA server or a local radius authentication. So we have lots of methods that we can use here. Another thing we can use here is an access control server. A lot of times Windows, I believe, has a radius implementation. I know that the Mac OS X server version does have a radius server. There are Linux versions. This can be Active Directory. This can be LDAP in the background. This can be Open Directory, any implementation you have there. So there's many ways to do this, but really what we're looking at is this. With a AAA or, most often a radius server, what happens is this. Like we said, this is the supplicant. This is the authenticator. And then we have our authentication server. That's where AAA really resides, our authentication, authorization, and accounting. Now, the AAA server is most often connected, like I said, to an LDAP or some other open directory for authentication. It needs a database of users and passwords that it can connect to. Most often, that is our open directory or Active Directory implementation. But in smaller environments, you may see a local AAA server with a smaller or local database used to authenticate users. Not horrible thing to do, but it's just one of those things. It may be there. This can even be your wireless LAN controller, maybe even built into a very large or active access point. It just depends on your implementation. But like we said, the AAA server is at the end of this process. Remember, it's what receives those 802.1x frames that are being passed up, while everything else is being dropped here. Absolutely everything's being dropped there until that authentication OK is sent back to that access point and authentication is given. That's when we allow traffic through based on that authentication. So all that information, all that authentication is actually checked up against the LDAP server. So it's key that you have communication here or communication to your local AAA server. I've seen this in the past in the real world where your LDAP server fails or communication to LDAP fails. For whatever reason, you have some big trouble happening in your environment at that point. You're going to get tons of calls because not only are the users unable to connect online, oftentimes if the user profiles or desktops are kept through their Active Directory server, they will be unable to even log into their computers in a lot of areas. So big problems if your Active Directory, Open Directory, LDAP goes down in your organizations. I'm sure you guys are aware of that. But in our wireless sense, if we're using Active Directory to authenticate for wireless activity itself, that's a problem as well. Now, why would we attach our Active Directory to Radius? Or why have that level of communication? Why add this next step? Let's take a look. The third A is accounting, isn't it? So we want accountability for who's on our network. We want to know that if Susan's using the network, we are able to account for her utilization, what she's doing, what she has access to. Active Directory is a very easy way to implement that within our environment. To say, oh, this person has usage of this network at this given time. Absolutely. I can limit this on time. I can limit this based on sensors. I can limit it on days. I can limit it to certain days of the week when she's scheduled to work. I have all sorts of tools at my disposal to grant access or deny access based on their Active Directory setting and that ICE or access control server or even any type of radius server. I have several different ways to monitor their behavior. Not just monitor their behavior, control access to this wireless network. So time, even temperature. If the temperature outside is 40 degrees, I can deny access to Susan. I can say, Susan, it's too nice outside. You have to go out there and play in the park. No wireless access for you. So how does this work? Well, this can be based on information connected to the radius server. Let me clean this up a little bit. This can be based on other servers that are connected as well. A time server. Even some type of sensor that is connected to this particular radius server or Cisco ICE implementation. Anything that we can derive metrics from, like time or temperature or day of the week, calendar, any of those metrics can be used to allow or deny access based on our Active Directory implementation.